Good afternoon. My voice and myself and our program, the Mellon Sawyer program on surveillance democracies. I'm delighted to welcome you here. Today we're joined by an internationally renowned scholar of privacy. Helen Nissenbaum is professor of media, culture, and communication and computer science at New York University, where she's also director of the Information Law Institute. You can already see in that one sentence the number of subjects that are affected by her work. She has written widely in the area, and I won't prolong this introduction by describing her many accolades. I will mention that she has a brand new book, which we will also have the pleasure of having her co-author for the book here actually next week. So Finn Brunton will be here talking about continuing this discussion next week. And so she's been a very important scholar in a number of books, including one we discussed this morning. She was gracious enough to join us in our seminar setting to discuss privacy in context. So she holds a PhD in philosophy from Stanford, so she is fundamentally a philosopher, even though she runs the Information Law Institute. Shows you the importance of the humanities to everything that we do. And she had both her bachelor's from the University of Witwatersrand. Let's welcome Ms. Nissenbaum.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here, and thank you very much, Professor Chana, because he and I have met each other on numerous occasions at the Privacy Law Scholars Conference, and it's a real honor for me to have been invited to be part of the series, and I'm sorry that I'm not here. I'm not going to meet everybody who's in the group. So, let's see. One thing I should mention is that Finn Brunton and I are colleagues in the same department, and so he and I discussed, and you won't get the same lecture from him. Instead, he's going to talk to you about his new book that he's working on, and I will talk about our, let's see if this works. I'll talk about, not so much, the book is of course an upshot of this work. I'm not sure why this is purple. I should just mention on my screen it's black. So if things happen that you can't see what's on there, we'll just have to work on that together, that adventure. So it's really about the idea behind obfuscation and why obfuscation emerged as something interesting. And from time to time I'll mention when there's stuff in the book that I'm not going to do in a lot of detail. But more than anything, I would like to share the ideas of the argument of obfuscation, why obfuscation is an important thing from my point of view, an important way for people to resist forms of unacceptable surveillance, and sometimes to use obfuscation even if not to resist, because we aren't able to resist, but at least to express protest. The work, as you can see, on obfuscation, and this is the book cover, and just to give evidence of the situation, this is what the book looks like in real life. People that I've worked with. Finn Brunton, of course, as a collaborator of many years, looking at the historical and the philosophical and the ethical side of things. Daniel Howe, Vincent Tubiana, and Mushan Zeraviv are computer scientists and computer designers who have helped and continue to help develop systems, and I'll introduce you to a couple of those systems and who continue to work and make them better and better. So just to step back a moment and say, how did it all happen? How did we start thinking, or how did at least I start thinking about obfuscation? And I'm just curious if anybody has heard about Track Me Not, maybe used Track Me Not. Oh, a few people. Oh, that's great. Okay, so TrackMeNot sends fake queries to search engines in an effort to obfuscate your profile to the search engine companies. And what happened was I was part of a very large group of computer scientists. We were working on a project, an interdisciplinary project, multi-university on privacy and security technology. And just at that time had emerged the news that the Department of Justice had asked Google and actually all of the search engine companies at the time for a lot of their query logs, and a year later, after AOL had released query logs for the computer science community to conduct research, claiming that they were anonymized, an enterprising New York Times reporter took that huge record and managed to re-identify a number of people on that record and wrote up a story. And this was more, and you know, for all sorts of reasons, triangulation, the fact that some of us, not many of us, do vanity searches and so forth. And I was at the time part of this group, and I was wondering, because I hadn't really thought about the fact that all my search queries are being logged. So my computer science colleagues said, well, there's nothing you can do about it, because in order to conduct the search, your search queries have to go to the search engine. And I kept saying, but what if I don't want them to store? I don't want them to look and study my search queries. They said, there's just nothing you can do about it. So that I thought, no, I think there must be something you can do about it. And that's when Daniel Howe, who was a PhD student in computer science, and I started working. We created TrackMeNot, which, as you can see, sends fake queries to the search companies. It now has expanded. It's almost 10 years later. Vincent Toubiana, who is also a computer scientist, works at the French data authority, Camille, in Paris, has expanded it. You can now install it, for example, in any search bar. So if you don't want Amazon to be keeping a profile on you, then you can do it too. Anyway, after we created TrackMeNot, I was super proud of it, and when I was running around in events, I just couldn't wait to tell people about TrackMeNot. And so I went around giving talks, and I got a lot of people saying, oh wow, that's so cool. But then a lot of people criticized, and they said, that's unethical, you're lying, you're polluting the data stream, and so forth. And so all of a sudden I thought, oh my goodness, what? I didn't expect that at all. There's obviously something I'm missing, and I came back to NYU. And that's when Finn and I started talking. We started thinking about it. What is TrackMeNot? Why are people, at least some people, responding in this way, telling me or telling us that we're doing something unethical and immoral? And Finn, who is a historian, a cultural historian of science and technology, was, you know, with him, we started understanding that TrackMeNot was a form of resistance that we labeled obfuscation. And here I learned so much, explored and suddenly revealed many obfuscating activities, not only in the realm of information and data, but all over. And the first one that we found and that he identified, and this is an actual photo, was the use of little pieces of aluminum foil cut to a very specific size, backed with black paper, that would be utilized by the Allied fighters in World War II as they're flying over and the Germans are watching them on the radar screen, one little phosphor dot on the radar screen, and all of a sudden hundreds of dots on the radar screen. Just for a few minutes, the bomb is dropped and the plane flies off. And of course then these little bits of aluminum fall to the ground. Radar chaff, thus, is a form of obfuscation. We found obfuscation in the natural world. Here is an orb weaver spider, and this, I'm really sorry that you can't see this very clearly. this is the real spider, and this is what the orb-weave does. It creates stuff, and it creates little blobs that look a lot like itself. And when wasps fly by, they are flying by and they see what they think is the spider, but it's actually this decoy. And evidently there are biologists who study this, and they say that the orb-weave spider is able to raise its chances by 40% of not being found by the wasp. Of course, if you want to hide some document, we're better to hide it, but in loads and loads of paper. The Craigslist robber did the same thing. He robbed a bank. At that time, he advertised on Craigslist for people to join him at a very specific time, wearing a very specific outfit. And as he came running up the bank, all of these people who looked exactly like him were standing there. And eventually, he was found and shot and killed. But anyway, this was a few years later. This was in 2008. And here's another example that some of us may be familiar of, the use of obfuscation. So what is distinctive about obfuscation? The idea here is that we're not in a position to hide ourselves. We cannot keep the information or ourselves out of sight, as with the orb-weave spider. We have to be evident. So how do we protect ourselves? We protect ourselves by adding a lot of noise, by having too much information out there. And I was trying to distinguish these two different strategies, different tactics for protecting privacy or hiding ourselves. And at the time, I was working with 2 PhD students in computer science at NYU. They were very interested in a way to hide your photographs. Say, for instance, you post photographs to Facebook. Now they have the ways of you can what's the right word? Scramble your photographs for the viewers, for third-party viewers. But how do you scramble your photographs that even Facebook or even the server is not able to see the photographs? And they worked on something called cryptogram. So what happens here is that that's what the photo looks like to the server. And that's one way of protecting privacy. But how does it work with obfuscation? Like this. So this is the definition that we settled on when we were writing our first paper in First Monday in 2011. It's the production, inclusion, addition, or communication of misleading, ambiguous, or false data in an effort to evade, distract, or confuse data gatherers or diminish the reliability and value of data aggregations. That is the definition. So although the term obfuscation is used in a variety of ways, this was the particular way of resisting and protesting that we were interested to explore. It characterized Track Me Not and many other instances, not only in regard to information. And now to get to the question that had started the whole conversation in the first place is, can it be defended on moral and political grounds? Is there something, is there a problem with obfuscation, and if so, what is it, and can it be mitigated? And this was something I had been very concerned about, and what we see over here are many of the critiques of obfuscation that I had heard when I went around talking about Track Me Not. It deceives, of course, it's lies, it's issuing searches to the search engine that are not ones that you actually issued yourself. It free rides on your peers because maybe you can get away with doing it because other people are following the rules, or maybe it free rides on the services. People would say it wastes bandwidth, it pollutes the data streams, it might even damage a system. Now, in order to take this argument all the way through, I won't have time to do it in the time that I have today. And so I want to take you through just some parts, the steps in the argument, and then highlight particular instances of the argument. And then, you know, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for discussion at the end, and you can let me know how persuasive I've been. So just to connect this a little bit with the book, the first part of the book, if you're interested in the specific, the many, many systems of obfuscation, both just out there and also information or data obfuscation, we list many in the book, including Crack Me Not, and several others that other people have developed and are available, and some of them are available merely as academic papers, and some of them are actually ongoing systems. So if you're confronting these kinds of ethical challenges, the first thing you want to be able to argue is that the ends are just. So in order for us, in order for me to justify or to defend Crack Me Not, or any system of obfuscation, you have to argue, just to begin, that the ends are just, that the ends themselves are moral. And here, in the case of Crack Me Not, this was to elude profiling and surveillance. But you might say that the Craigslist robber, although you might think, oh, that was cute, that was clever, but I would suspect most of us in this room would say robbing a bank, not sure. Destroying a rival, escaping a predator. Now, obfuscation is sometimes used, there's hardware obfuscation, and what the hardware engineers are doing, they take a chip and they have different the different transistors on the chip in the silicon. And
the computer scientist right here.
Okay, good. I'm going to take your word for it. And if you want to copy the chip and you want to get the same functionality, but you can try and reverse engineer, but sometimes what they'll do, what the hardware engineers will do, is they'll put in decoys into the chip. And so if you're simply sort of stupidly trying to manufacture exactly what you have, then you may not get the same functionality. And so obfuscation is often used, sometimes also to put code that obfuscates the code in software that's performing the crucial function. You can add lines of code that aren't really doing anything but might fool someone who's just trying to copy. So there are ways, and we could discuss, is that end just or not? And there's a lot, so you have to, so here's an example. This is one that Finn had found for us, is that in France, people love to speed, and the police, of course, have the radar detectors, as we do here, and the drivers buy these radar detectors, the detectors of the detectors. And it beeps every time you're going past, so you know where the cops are, so you slow down. So what do the cops do? They buy a whole lot of these things, and they put them all over the roads in an effort to obfuscate. So now your car's saying, oh, there's a detector there and there and there. So, well, I mean, the very great thing is that, according to, for road safety, is that you slow down at all these times. Is that a good use? Well, we have to have a discussion about it, but the ends have to be just. But as anybody who has done, for example, has studied utilitarian ethics would know, that you also have to ask whether the means are justified. The ends could be perfectly fine, but are they justified? Are they proportionate? Is this an acceptable way to achieve the ends that you're setting out to achieve? And so this is part of the argument that we also had to settle on. One of the things that we observe, and this now really gets to the heart of a lot of the information or data surveillance that we're in the midst of at the moment, is that we're in, I believe, a serious imbalance, an asymmetry. Many of us who are the data subjects, we don't know what data is being collected. We don't really know. I mean, all of us sitting here, or maybe some of us sitting here, have taken the trouble to read a privacy policy, and it can be a very, well-written privacy policy, whatever that may mean, but it's very difficult to know what these relationships are. And I haven't been following my notes. We don't know very much about the back end. Sometimes it's through sheer ignorance. Often it's through complexity. So if we think about targeted advertising at the moment, everywhere we go, we have ad networks, they're tracking us, they are performing analysis. The institutional back end of it is hugely complex. There's so many parties who have access to the information. They're the analytics companies, they're the data brokers, they're the people who are connecting online information with information offline and so on. So it's enormously complex. And even the parties, the website owners, let's say the New York Times, are not aware of what's going on. So there's enormous complexity, and I should say sometimes there's a concerted effort to keep the information subjects in the dark. I think this is a little bit more sinister. Maybe this is what many of us reacted to when we started reading the Snowden revelations, is how much we were kept in the dark, not only because we were ignorant, but because efforts were made to keep us in the dark. Also, the way we experience, for example, the web, does not clue us into what's going on. We don't realize when we go to a website that the different parts of the website actually come from different parties, and the different parties have different policies vis-a-vis the information they're able to collect from us. And Joe Turo, for example, some of you may know his name. He's a very well-known expert in advertising and also writes a lot about privacy. Has done a study of the language of privacy policies. That in itself is a form of obfuscation to make us not understand what is going on with information about ourselves. And then finally, and this has been revealed in work by Chris Hoofnagel and some folks at UC Berkeley, there are non-disclosure agreements that companies actually have to sign with data brokers, so that if an individual would go to the company, I don't know, Williams-Sonoma, I'm in a law school context. That's just a for example. I'm not saying anything about Williams-Sonoma, but you might say, oh, how did you know my address? And if they've signed a non-disclosure with the data broker, they're not allowed to tell you where they got this information. So this is what we call the epistemic asymmetry. And we're also we're functioning within a power asymmetry as well, because a lot of the informational exchange takes place within the context of relationships that we simply cannot refuse. And it's not, well, we could refuse them, but if we want to remain part of society in a feasible way, have a job, do shopping, drive a car, live in an apartment or a house. I mean, these are things that are all now fundamentally information exchanges. So opting out is simply not an option. We've explored possibilities of law, and this is very, very slow. Vested interests are extremely strong. And as for corporate best practice, I think you only need to look at things like Google's federated privacy policy to see that this is the fox guarding the hen house. So we're in this situation, and we compared obfuscation we found it useful to use a concept that James C. Scott developed called a weapon of the weak. Of course, this concept for him was developed when he was studying communities in Malaysia where the peasant farmers and some of the workers were much more, they were seriously exploited, they don't necessarily have the vote and so on. So he was looking at when people lack commonly agreed upon or commonly recognized means of expressing themselves or exerting power, as we might think in this country, if you have the vote, if you have money, if you have guns, you can express yourself and have some power. But what do you do when you don't? And this is the idea of the weapon of the weak. Things like heel dragging. Gary Marks has a great paper describing various of these techniques, attack in the shoe. And we believe that obfuscation is this kind of weak weapon of the weak. Now let's go back to tracking out for a moment. And this article was published less than a week ago. And it's expressing the same thing. Look at us, we're 10 years later in the discussion about web search and still worries that actually we don't know what is happening with these aggregated search queries. We're in this position of serious asymmetries. So what do we do? And this is where obfuscation can sometimes come to the rescue. The vector of impact, this is a term I've been thinking about. When you don't have that direct force, when you can't go in and say, I don't want you to be collecting my search queries, what do you do? And in the case of the search, I hope you can read this. You probably can't see this. It's a door. It's an open door, just to let you know that. So what you go to the government, you say, please pass a law. You go to the company, that thing, let's say it's Google, it's this huge corporation. How do you get across to them, this is what you want? How do you get into that huge institution and have an impact, express what you want? What do? There's only one thing you can do. As far as I know, there's only one way I can get the Google search engine to listen to me. And what is that?
Search.
You can search, right? That is the vector of impact. If that's what you can do, that's how you get your obfuscation going. And that, in retrospect, is why we were able, just two of us, a graduate student and myself, and I don't even code, so it was just him, really, wrote the program that is Track Me Not. So we're back to the ethics and politics and some of the charges, those charges that were brought against Track Me Not, and you could argue against many forms of data obfuscation. And some of the pushback, and here again, I won't have time to go into details of these arguments. So if you think about the question of waste versus use, because many people would say, oh, Track Me Not wastes bandwidth. It's an ethical question because remember we're saying even if the ends are just, the means that you're using may not be just. They may not be defensible. So if you think that the waste versus the waste argument is a good argument, what you realize actually is that who defines what's waste? So you live in Northern California, and you have just had a big drought. What is waste? Is waste having a shower? Or is it use? Let's say you have a leaky faucet and you just didn't get around to fixing it. Is that waste or is it use? What about those people in Southern California that love to have green lawns? And so they insist on watering their lawns every day so it looks green. Is that waste or is it use?
Waste.
Answering that question is a highly political issue. You have to decide what do we value, and this is a limited resource, and so are we going? So that question of waste and use is a very highly charged question, and so although it might seem obvious to at least the person who challenged us to say you're wasting bandwidth, the pushback we came with is that actually, if you believe that defending against profiling for your search queries, as the writer from The Atlantic was concerned about, then in fact utilizing, although you are utilizing bandwidth, or although not more than people who play World of Warcraft, and I think that's a waste. But okay, that's not really part of the discussion. It's to say that protecting myself against profiling is a use. It's not a waste. And therefore, this ethical question becomes a political question in these ways. And similarly, the other one that is, I think, also a really important one is this idea of polluting the data stream, polluting the data lake, if you will, because we have big data, and big data is going to cure disease and save the climate, and what else? And make cities run better and make us fit and healthy, because we're all going to engage in Internet of Things and smart grid and so forth. And indeed, I believe that, I believe a lot of this. But there's a sleight of hand in the argument. I'm convinced that some of the data that is flowing from me in my interaction is being put to public use. And I'm willing to say that that's a good thing, and of course we need to put protections into it and so on, but when the data that's being collected from me is being collected by a company who's putting it to use to make more profit without taking my interest or the public interest into consideration, I'm not sure that I have an obligation to keep that data stream or the data lake, whatever you want to call it, pristine. There's an argument to be had here, and that's all I'm going to say about it. But it also relates to this question of whose risks and what the level of confidence we should have in the risks and so forth. So another one of the, being convinced by these arguments, we developed another system, Daniel, Mushon, and I, and you can download this one too. It's called Ad Nauseam. Now, what Ad Nauseam does, it's pushing back against the tracking of people as we venture on the web, going from website to website, because we know that there's this back end, and many of the large ad networks can track us all across the web. And one of their vectors of impact is the ads that we click. And what Ad Nauseam does is it clicks on every ad. So, I'm going to do this so much. I sort of lost track of, okay, I have a little bit of time. So if I can, Okay, I'll try and come back to this. I thought I had installed a link here. Nope. Okay. Anyway, this is we're very proud of this. It's been functioning for about a year, and you can download it for free. It's open code. It's open source, and so forth. Now, this is the ethical discussion, and aside from that. The question is, does obfuscation work? And this was a critique that we got from many computer scientists who cared with us. They believed in the same principles, but they were concerned that data obfuscation doesn't work. And so this was an interesting discussion for us to have, but many of these were cryptographers who thought that it would be very easy to reverse engineer or to use machine learning to throw out the bad, the misleading information. And this is what obfuscation does, by the way. And when we confronted those kinds of criticisms, we realized something else that's general about obfuscation. And that is that obfuscation, and here I'm coming back to this weapon of the weak, but now I'm focusing on the part where I say it's weak. But what do I mean by weak? It doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't get things done, but it's highly contingent. And obfuscation as a strategy or as a tactic needs to be extremely matched, well matched to the specific problem that it's trying to solve. It's a highly contingent response. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And so when we were going through the many obfuscating systems that we had studied and relocated, we could see that they were all, many of them were, that they clumped together under different goals. Some of them were to buy time. So the clearest example of that would be the radar chaff, which is all you need is maybe 10 minutes to drop the payload and go. That's all you need. Now, a cryptographer might want many, many years on a huge machine to be able to decrypt something when the key is such and such a length. But for obfuscation, if it's buying time, you only need to buy the amount of time that you need. And so you need to do that. Sometimes it's to provide cover. Many people thought that Track Me Not could be used to provide deniability. So there were, at the beginning, people would write to us with different complaints. They would say, why are you issuing these namby-pamby search queries when what you really want to do is provide cover for people who are interested in looking for sensitive information? Then we would add a few bad terms into the mix, and they would come back to us and say, why are you doing that? I'm sure that if I use Track Me Not, the NSA is going to be onto me in no time. And we realized, you know, what are we trying to do with Track Me Not? Because it's clear we couldn't satisfy everyone. We actually have a compromise at the moment, which is people can choose an RSS feed, and so you can have some say in it. But we had to make choices as to which of these goals to and for myself, I was most interested with interfering with profiling, and that's also the purpose that ad nauseum serves. Early on, we decided this is not going to be the tool. If you want to hide your identity, you should use Tor or a different mechanism, but because Track Me Not is not going to allow you to do that. And sometimes you don't care, you just want to express protest. So, and this now gets to another dimension of thinking about the different forms of obfuscating systems, because we recognize some of them are done by individuals, some need a collective. So loyalty card swapping, people had to get together in a group and swap their loyalty cards. Do we want the obfuscation to be seen or not seen? Do we want, say, with Track Me Not, do we want to fly under the radar, so to speak, or do we care that Google or the search or Baidu or the search engines know that we're obfuscating? Sometimes if we want to be protesting, then we want them to know that we are, and so on. How selective or general, short-term, long-term. And so these are the different dimensions of obfuscation, knowing that it's highly contingent. And this is my last slide, because if we've come to the conclusion, as we have, that obfuscation is an important strategy or tactic for the individual to perform, to protest, to resist, where the other options are not available, law, corporate, best practice, and so forth. What do we need to do? Because it might seem that something like Track Me Not can be done no matter what, but in fact, the possibility of obfuscating itself is quite contingent. So first of all, we're very interested in thinking through some of the statistical challenges, the science and engineering of obfuscation, also understanding the politics and the social scientific dimension. There's a lot of work that needs to do to understand the threat models. What are the, you could say this, what are the problems or what are the questions that obfuscation is the right answer for? Because it isn't the only way, and often obfuscation will not achieve your end. And so you're often in situations where if you're after privacy or resistance to surveillance, then obfuscation is not going to achieve that. So we need to understand the threat models. We need to have more research and system development so that we can create lots and lots. And with the Internet of Things coming our way, there are going to be hundreds of opportunities to utilize obfuscation to this end. The fact that we had open protocols, that we were able to access Firefox and Chrome, we were not able to access Safari, is something we need, and those things don't happen automatically. This is a matter of technology policy, and these are ways we need to safeguard the possibility. And finally, we need law that helps us to limit the enforcement of certain terms of service, and you can think of things like Facebook's real name policy. Google, for example, has a policy against automated access of the services. So in principle, they could come after people who are using Track Me Not and say, can't you see you violating the terms of service? And so legal questions, policy questions about how enforceable terms of service are going to be very relevant to the possibility of utilizing and developing obfuscation. And I hope that there'll be people who will take this up and work on the various dimensions as you proceed. Thank you.
So we have time for a few questions. I'll begin while you guys are thinking about some. So I wanted to ask you a question from a philosophical perspective. So you described the ethics here as utilitarian, in some sense, I guess. But I wanted to ask, so you evaluated the means, evaluated the ends, and discussed the proportion of the means towards the ends. But I wanted to ask you, what if we approached an entirely different way, which was to approach it in a more Kantian way, which is to suggest perhaps, what if, and I would perhaps formulate it in this way, which is to say, what if, everyone obfuscated, that is, what I did was universalized, right? And you've seen in the, Neelay Patel as a piece in The Verge last month saying this is the end of the internet, essentially. So ad blocking, so ad nauseum, et cetera. So this is the, this is the way that the internet dies. And so I'm wondering how you respond to that critique.
I don't know that I can, I'm not an expert in Kantian, and maybe the Kantian would have an immediate problem if you take literally the idea of if the murderer comes and says, where is my victim? And you're not supposed to lie even in that circumstance. So I don't think the Kantian, that type of Kantian would be happy with obfuscation. So I should admit this. However, getting to the specific question about ad blocking, I feel very strongly about this because there is an obfuscation in that response, which is the web is going to die because of people using ad blocking. And ad nauseum is built on top of AdBlock Plus because we had a difficulty in being able to identify the ads on a page, and AdBlock Plus is open, and we were able, therefore, to utilize their widget that recognizes the ad. And so even though, in fact, we weren't interested in blocking. We were more interested in clicking all the ads. Now that's highly problematic also, because this is the business model behind paying for ads, and so people accused us of click fraud. But the point I want to get to is who's going to be responsible for the destruction? If people are so concerned about the ad industry and what they're doing online, and in response, people start utilizing ad blocking, who's to blame? Who should be looking at their practices and saying, maybe these obnoxious ads that kind of come in your face, or maybe this back-end tracking of everywhere people go and profiling them on the back. People don't like that. So maybe we need to redraw the conversation. And then finally, it's kind of mischief to say that, to connect the ads themselves with the tracking. And that's why we were a little dissatisfied with AdNauseam blocking the ads, because we wanted to say we don't actually mind ads, and they're contextual ads that are not doing the whole back end of the tracking. And so contextual ads are also can be financially successful, and they're much less dangerous. And so we want to engage in that kind of conversation. Yeah, I'm pleased you raised that. Yeah.
So I think it's a follow-up on Anupam's question, that it seems to me that there's this implicit bargain that we have, that Google gives us lots of cool free stuff, like search and Gmail, and in exchange, we give them an ability to have a revenue stream. And so if we are not willing to keep our side of the bargain, why do we get to keep the free stuff?
I don't remember making a bargain. I mean, I don't mean that. I want to. Okay, that's sort of the initial pushback. I would like to see the bargain, and I would like society to figure out the bargain, and not to place it in the hands of whoever the actor is on the other side, the data collector, the complete discretion to decide what they're collecting, how they're going to use it, what the impact is on our lives, and so forth. Because, I mean, the situation we're in has crept up on us, and there may be the questions of the data is a source of revenue. Clearly, it is a source of revenue for data brokers, for many parties. But at this point, it's completely uncontrolled, and there are no questions. There isn't a sufficient conversation to be had about what values and what purposes and whose values and whose to enable that. And that's when I say that I don't remember making the bargain, it's because it's not made explicit to us.
I guess it's true that Google doesn't disclose fully what it did, but we all know that they use targeted ads. I completely agree with you. I think of this as a contract, an implicit one. The government regulates the terms of contracts all the time. But normally we don't allow private individuals to enter into a bargain and then say, I don't want to carry out my side. And I guess what you're saying is there's no bargain.
There's no bargain. We haven't, even with a contract, and I want to be serious about it, because I don't think that, I'm not going to support the situation where I say it's up to each individual to just decide how much information in their own terms. We all just going to make up our own terms with the individual. But right now, there's no public discussion. Well, there is, but in the pockets of privacy academics and privacy activists, there is a discussion that we're trying to have. but it's to think about what are the, so for example, when I started being worried about search, and I'm very concerned about search. I'm less concerned about commercial interactions, but search struck me as a lot like a library. And it felt that if this is the important way for people to conduct intellectual research on the web, then it needs to be protected the way we protect intellectual research. And there was times where the search companies, and Google in particular being the dominant player, would say, we're keeping search separate, until they said, we're not keeping search separate. And so if we could extract the values, this is a little bit connects to the theory of contextual integrity. If we can look to the values of the different activities and say, yeah, actually there's a reason why a search query should be different from some other activities. But what are those reasons? And we need to tease out those values and come to some accommodation. That's the direction I would like to see us going. Yeah.
So can you elaborate on exactly how you want, the kind of privacy you want in your searches, and how Google can achieve that without interfering with how a referential search engine works?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that you're asking me a little bit to design. I'm not capable of. I can just point you to a different search engine, which is DuckDuckGo, and say, this is a search engine that, according to the people who I trust, does not.
But does DuckDuckGo?
DuckDuckGo.
Just DuckDuck.
Go.
Does that get you? Does that have it as?
It's not as good.
Do the intuit your answer as well? No, because it's not it's not as good a search engine. I mean, it's intrinsic to the beauty of Google's search engine.
Yes.
That your privacy is compromised in the way you don't want it to be.
So this is no. I'm pleased you asked the question, and I'm going to repeat something that I had said in the discussion earlier today, and that is that the way in society there are many interactions that we engage in where information flow is crucial to the successful transaction. So when we would say, I want Amazon to ship something to me, and we say, but I'm not telling you my address, then people think this is ridiculous. And when you go to a physician to be treated, the physician can ask you a whole lot of questions about yourself. And if you want good treatment, that information has to be shared. So where society recognizes that information flow is crucial, or you're in a law school, so when you seek the advice of a lawyer, you are asked to, or you do for your own good, or to get the best legal service, you need to provide all the relevant information to the lawyer. And the way society has dealt with those kinds of circumstances is to create some laws to encourage the sharing of that information that are needed for the good function, but constraints on the flow of the information so that that practice will continue. I'm not against information sharing, and I'm very much in favor of information sharing for the appropriate functionality, but I'm not in favor of this kind of anything goes. You are using my service, I can do anything with your information, because I don't think it's productive for the individual, and I'm not sure that it's I mean, already now many of us we would use email, and now people just don't use email for certain kinds of communications. I think that's a pity. It's a pity that we don't have we're not in a position to trust. Whereas if we send things in the U.S. Postal Service, we have the assurance from law that that's protected. So that's the kind of constraint on flow I think is productive. I mean, one of the things with obfuscation, I didn't maybe make the appropriate connections, but some of you might be familiar with the do not track. The effort is the do not track, which is people came together to try and create a standard whereby when you went to different websites, you could have some kind of flag in your browser that spoke to the server and said, don't track me. I'm not sure I can even defend that. But what happened is this effort went on and on and on to create a standard, and the ad industry, there was nothing on the other side. This was, the ad industry led things, and then this whole effort collapsed. I think that giving people the power to take matters into their own hands will at least give us some bargaining power into the next round of do not track, where we can together optimize what we get out of information flux. Okay.
Thank you very much.